My name is Alastair Humphreys. Back in my youth, my glory days, I spent 4 years cycling around the world. Ever since then, I've been interested in the idea of living adventurously. But the definition of living adventurously differs for everyone, and it also changes over time as our lives and circumstances change. So I decided to get back on my bike and to go and ask different people what living adventurously means to them. I spent a glorious summer month cycling around Yorkshire, the county where I grew up. I wanted to feel how exploring locally compared to travelling on different continents. And I was interested in the idea of home and whether it's possible to have a proper adventure to make a real journey close to home. It turned out to be such a fantastic experience, riding through mile after mile of beautiful landscapes, discovering so many places that I'd never seen before in all my life, and sleeping out under the stars for weeks on end. It was genuinely one of the adventuring highlights of my life. But the best part of this journey, by a long way, was the privileged opportunity I had of learning from so many ordinary people who have chosen to live extraordinary lives. This is not a podcast then about adventure or cycling or camping. I met students and parents and pensioners, poets, artists, athletes, teachers, an IT expert, and someone who earns a living from making fancy sandcastles, a man who lived out of a van, another whose castle had been in the family for 800 years. I met a self-confessed lazy Michelin star chef and a woman who was midway through running 100 barefoot marathons. I interviewed a gold medal Paralympian cyclist, a couple who had cycled around the world together, and a retired lady who now takes old, elderly, homebound, lonely folk out on a modified electric bicycle for a taste, a remembering perhaps, of freedom, adventure, and feeling the wind in their hair once again. In each episode, you'll hear an unedited like that, an unedited conversation about the guest's slant on living a curious, adventurous, fulfilled life. I also had a deck of blank playing cards on which I'd written some of the big questions from life about finding a balance between work and play, the barriers that stop us doing what we dream of, overcoming fears, and where you sit on a scale of weirdness from 1 to 10. Asking very different people an assortment of similar questions created some fascinating answers. The interviews will all be released in the order that I recorded them, mirroring my own journey on the bike and the cumulative lessons that I learned from each guest along the way. Every character I spoke to was good company and a thoughtful guest, but inevitably you'll find one person more interesting than another. If someone doesn't float your boat, just skip on to the next episode. There are over 40 interviews in this series, and they're all very different. Life's too short to listen to a chat you're not very interested in. I had never recorded interviews like this, never done a podcast before. It is perhaps a bit rough and ready. For many of the people I chatted to, it was their first time being interviewed. But I liked all of that very much. Ordinary people pursuing their own version of out of the ordinary. I really wanted to speak to normal people, not famous people, to get proper thought out answers, not just sound bites. And all of this made the experience fresh and surprising and honest. And I really hope that you agree. The podcast world is a crowded one. There's so much good stuff out there clamoring for your ears. So if you do like the sound of this Living Adventurously podcast, could I ask you to help me, please, by subscribing to the podcast? It's free, of course. You can do that on the podcast provider of your choice. And if you can be bothered, it would be a great help, a real massive help, if you left a review on the podcast website or mentioned Living Adventurously on your own social media channels. Thank you, and welcome to Living Adventurously. I really, really hope that these conversations give you some ideas of your own some ideas towards living a more adventurous life every day.